Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr. Today I have a little bit of a different video for the channel and something that maybe a lot of us can relate to or maybe not. I'm curious to hear it. But I'm going to call this one Accidental Encounters, Accidental Baseball Encounters, if you will. And basically I'm going to be talking about four times where I had a brush with a Major League Baseball player in one way, shape, or form that was and these are not like star players by any means. These are probably I don't know, you may not have even heard of some of these players, but we're going to talk about it. And then I have a question for you guys at the end. If you watch to the end of the video, I have a question for you, and I'll want you to share your accidental encounters or whatever you want to call them. So this is probably, I don't know how long this video will be, but we'll see how it goes. So when I was younger, I very fortunate. My parents took me to baseball games on a fairly regular basis. Regular. We didn't live. We lived about 3 hours from Chicago, for example, or probably 4.5 to 5 to St. Louis, in a smaller town in Iowa on the Mississippi River. So anyway, we didn't have a baseball. We didn't have baseball right in the town that I lived in, but it was within driving distance. So at least once, sometimes maybe twice a year, when I was growing up, we would go to baseball games, and so it was great. I have a lot of memories of that, and so these stories, for whatever it's worth, seem to all be from around the same year or two for some reason, and that year or two is like 1980 or so, which I would have been like 7 years old at the time. So it's crazy that I even remember these, but I guess they've just stuck with me over the years. And I'm going to talk about some of these encounters that I've had. We would often, and these stories are going to come from St. Louis when we went to St. Louis Cardinals baseball games. I was never a St. Louis Cardinals baseball fan. Sorry if you are. However, we would go there because it was close. And we would stay at the Marriott Hotel. There was right across from Busch Stadium at the time, there was a Marriott Hotel. And it was literally right across the street from the stadium. That was one benefit of it. The second benefit is that the players, the opposing team, stayed there. So I don't know, remember how we even learned that that was true, but at some point we learned that that's where the opposing team was staying. And so oftentimes, like after the game, players would come to the bar, and you could actually just see the players down at the bar, down at the hotel bar. In any event, here are a couple of cases of players we ran into during that time period, and I'm probably going to leave out some, but these are the most memorable. The first one is Ron LeFlore. Now, Ron LeFlore is famous, if you will, as a baseball player who was basically drafted out of prison. He first played any kind of organized baseball in prison. He hadn't played prior to that, organized. He hadn't played prior to that. But apparently he was so good that he got on the radar of, I believe, the Detroit Tigers at that time. They went down and saw him play in a prison league and basically drafted him out of prison. They gave him a salary. Part of his parole conditions was that he had a job and all of this stuff, so it qualified him for that. He was in for armed robbery, I think, at the time. In any event, so he got out and started playing for Detroit in 1974. Now, I didn't meet him in 1974, but that's what he was. That's kind of what the start of his career is notorious for. He played for 9 years. He played most of the 6 of those years in Detroit. He played 1 year in Montreal, and he played a couple of years with the White Sox at the end of his career. And he was a career 288 hitter, so pretty decent. He had a career OPS 734. I actually, keep in mind we're in St. Louis, and this was before interleague play, really. In 1980, he played for the Montreal Expos. This is the 1 year he played for Montreal, and he hit. His average dropped off. The prior year he had hit 300. This year he hit 257. But he stole 97 bases that year. So 97. He led the league in steals that year. 97 stolen bases. Towards the end of the season, though, he broke or fractured his wrist, and So it was before the game. And that was the other thing. The players would just walk over before the game, oftentimes. They'd be staying at the hotel, they'd walk over to the stadium prior to the game. And so we would often mill around outside just to see if we could see players come to the ballpark and that kind of thing. And we're milling around outside. I'm with my uncle was 6 years older than me at the time, and he was at the game with us. So I would have been seven-ish, and he would have been 13, and my parents were there. But I think it was my dad spotted a player wearing had a cast on. We didn't know it was a player, but a guy wearing a cast, and he's like, "I'm pretty sure that's Ron LeFlore. Pretty sure that's Ron LeFlore." And so he's like, "Go get his autograph," because that was the other thing we would do is get autographs. And so me and my uncle, who was a 13 and a 7 year old at the time, right, with my parents there, of course, we run over to him, and my uncle's like, "Hey, can we have your autograph?" And Ron LeFleur looks around. He's like looking around because there's some people milling around outside the ballpark, and he's like he kind of waves us around the corner to a more private area. And again, my parents were there, so we were safe. But so we walk around the corner with this stranger. Basically, we didn't know who he was, and sure enough, he signed an autograph for us. He just didn't want to sign an autograph and then get swarmed or whatever by people. And again, I was fortunate that my dad would have even known who he was. But yeah, so we got an autograph signed by Ron LeFlore outside the ballpark. He's in street clothes with a cast on, and he signed. And I was trying to figure out when this happened. I looked back, and the only time he was in a cast, and you can find a picture of it online, is in 1980 in September. I think is when he broke his wrist. So they played the Cardinals at St. Louis September 19th, 20th, and 21st. So it probably would have been one of those days. It's amazing what technology allows you to narrow down nowadays. So anyway, that was my time meeting Ron LeFleur while he signed an autograph for us. Another kind of random time we were walking around before or after the game. I couldn't remember which. And there on the steps of the hotel, just sitting there. I think must have been after a game, and it was probably an afternoon game, so this would have been in the evening. Again, wearing street clothes, Rusty Staub. So Rusty Staub had a long career, played 23 years. Really was at the peak of his career in like 1970 or thereabouts, 69, 70, those years. So very late 60s, early 70s is when he was in his prime. This would have been when he was with the Mets, probably the Mets, in the early 80s, because that's when he played for the Mets. And again, once again, it was in St. Louis, probably at the Marriott Hotel. He was sitting on the steps, and he's just sitting there talking to somebody. I don't remember who, wearing street clothes. But once again, my dad recognized him, and so got his autograph. Didn't have much of an encounter other than that. Just got his autograph from him at that time as he's sitting on the steps. So that's Rusty Staub. I have a couple, just a little bit more stranger stories, if you will. So once again, this is probably in the early 80s. I would get maybe, yeah, probably like 80, 81. And for whatever reason, we tended to be there when they were playing the Mets. I don't know why. Maybe this was all at the same time. Rusty Staub and this one was at the same time because I'm not sure. But anyway, we were on in the elevator, riding down the elevator. It was just my parents and I on the way to the game. So before game time, we were in the elevator on the way down. And I think I was wearing a Mets hat or something because at that time I wanted to be opposed to anything that was like I wanted to choose the underdog or whatever, I guess, at the time. And so since we were in St. Louis, I was like, no, I'm not for St. Louis. I'm for whoever's playing St. Louis. I don't know. This was me as a 7 or 8 year old, right? And so we're riding down the elevator, and there's an older couple in the elevator, and they see that we, have a baseball glove and stuff. That we're obviously going to the game, and they're like, "Oh, who are you rooting for today?" And I said, "The Mets." And they chuckle, and they're like, "Oh, well, our son plays for the Mets." Our son and my parents are like, "What?" And apparently they're like, yeah, our son is Doug Flynn. So Doug Flynn, who played for the Mets, Doug Flynn played for 11 years. He played for the Mets. He played for Montreal, and later in his career, I believe it was when he was with the Mets. So that would have been like 81, maybe was his last year for the Met playing with the Mets. Probably would have been like 81, maybe 80 or 81 is my guess. And and so yeah, he was he's a career 238 hitter, so he's not the greatest hitter. He did get a Gold Glove though in 1980, so he's known for a good defender. He's played second base, shortstop, and third base in his career. In any event, they're like, "Oh yeah, our son plays for the Mets," and I'm like, everybody's like, "Well, that's amazing that we're running into you guys." And so we didn't think anything else of it other than, "Wow, we just rode in the elevator with Doug Flynn's dad and mom. That's cool." Well, after the game, we would often hang out in the lobby to see if we could see players from the other team coming through the lobby, either going back to their room or, as I said, sometimes they'd go to the bar or whatever to try to get autographs and whatnot. So we're milling about the lobby, and then we're approached by that couple again. They're like, "Hey," and we're like, "Hey," and he's like, "Just a second." And next thing we know, Doug Flynn is being brought over to us, and their Doug Flynn's parents are saying, "Hey, we just ran into this family in the elevator, and he said he was rooting for you guys." And so they brought their son over, and Doug Flynn came over and chatted with us for a few minutes. I don't remember the extent of the conversation, but we got an autograph. We got, I wish we would have gotten pictures at that time, but this was back before the days of digital photography and all of that, when you actually had to take a physical picture. And so I'm not sure why we didn't take a picture, because we did have cameras and stuff. I don't know if maybe we didn't have a camera with us. I don't know. We don't have a picture documenting this at all. It's just a memory that I have. But in any event, Doug Flynn, got to meet him just by sheer coincidence of riding in the elevator with his parents. Very strange. Not as strange, though, as this next one. Not as strange as this next one. Um, this next one was probably, I think it's like 85. So I would have been 12 at the time. And again, I say we lived in Iowa on the Mississippi River. We never lived near the Quad Cities. If you're familiar with Quad Cities does have a minor league team. Um, at that time, I think there were Quad City Angels, several affiliates. It is one of the best minor league ballparks you'll ever see, though, because of the scenery and everything. It's right on the river. There's a bridge right that you can see right over right field that crosses the river. Beautiful stadium, beautiful stadium. So check it out if you're ever in the area. But in any event, we're at the mall in the Quad Cities, and I'm with my parents again. And again, I would have been like 12 years old, maybe. And we're stopped in maybe Sears or J.C. Penney or some department store in the mall. I don't know. We're on our way either to our car or going into the mall or whatever. And we're stopped by an older couple. In my mind, it was an older couple. I was 12 at the time. They were probably younger than what I am now. But anyway, they're like, "Hey, we like your shirt." I had a shirt on at the time. It was just a generic, it wasn't an affiliated MLB shirt or anything like that. But the shirt said, "Play me or trade me." That was what the shirt said on it. And I was 12 years old. It was just a shirt that probably my mom had gotten for me at some point. Who knows? But it just said, "Play me or trade me" on it. And this couple's like, "Hey, we like your shirt. Do you know if there's like adult sizes in it?" And we're like, "What?" And it was like very strange. We're just approached by this couple that say they like my shirt and it says, "Play me or trade me." They're like, "Yeah, we'd like to get our son-in-law that shirt. Um, do you know where you got it?" And all this stuff. And my parents are like, "We have no idea where we got the shirt." And they're like, "Yeah." We're like, "Well, who's your son? Why do you want the shirt?" And they're like, "Oh," or it's their son-in-law. Sorry. And they're like, "Our son-in-law is Mark Clear." Mark Clear was a pitcher for Boston and the Angels and the Brewers later in his career. He pitched for 11 years in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, between 79 and 88, actually. So somewhere in that time frame. And again, I think this was 1985. So he was playing for Boston at the time. So once again, very weird that here in the Quad Cities, we would run into his in-laws, they're like, yeah, we want to get him that shirt because he hasn't been playing as much as he wants. He's been on the bench. He's a relief pitcher, but he hasn't been playing as much. So we want to get him that shirt because he wants them to either play him or trade him to a different team so he can get some playing. And he wants to play. He doesn't want to just ride the bench, and not ever get brought into a game. So anyway, very. Of course, we had no idea where we got the shirt or anything like that. And we never met Mark Clear himself, but we met his in-laws of all things in just an accidental, coincidental circumstance in the Quad City Mall. So I went to look this up today just to see why would they have been there. Was my memory right? Did that really happen? Why would they have been there? Well, first I saw that Mark Clear played for the Quad City Angels, minor league team, but that would have been in the 70s. So I'm like, well, it wouldn't be from that. He was born in LA, I think. So it wasn't his parents weren't from the Quad City area. And yes, he played for the Quad City Angels, but I'm like, that was in the 70s. So I don't know why his in-laws would have ran into us there. He wouldn't have been, because that my other thought was, oh, he was playing for the Angels at some point. No, he was not playing for the Quad City Angels during that time in the mid 80s. Well, then I noticed through an article that I read on the web that he ended up marrying a girl that was an usherette at the Quad City Angels baseball games. So he married her in the 80s, I believe. And so then it clicked for me. This girl was an usherette for the Quad City Angels, so her parents lived in the Quad Cities. And so they lived there and probably continued to live there in the 80s. And then I did some more looking, and in 1985, sure enough, he was struggling. He was a struggling pitcher at that time. And in 1980, yeah, 1980, maybe it was 83, 84, maybe, but I think it took place in 85. But in any event, he had been struggling, and they hadn't been pitching him as much because his ERA was like super high. So 83 would make more sense because the ERA in 83 was 6.28. So maybe it was 83, in which case I was 10. Yeah, maybe it was 83 and I was 10. But in any event, he was struggling. They hadn't been playing him, and I'm like, that's got to be the year that this happened, because that would make sense why his in-laws would say, yeah, he wants to play more often. He's been riding the bench. In any event, that's my story of meeting Mark Clear's in-laws. So 4 stories, minor. I'm going to throw in a bonus one for you. Here's a bonus story. I was at the Chicago White Sox game with my son when he was young. And I can't remember how old my son was. But in any event, we're in the concourse, going to the bathroom or whatever. Get out of the bathroom. I'm waiting for my son to get out of the bathroom. And I'm just standing there. The concourse is kind of clear. This is a White Sox game. And I all of a sudden hear Jerry, chants of Jerry. And I'm like, what's going on? And I look around, and walking right by me, probably 10 feet away from me, is Jerry Springer. Yes, Jerry Springer from the Jerry Springer Show. I think he was with Steve, his bodyguard, it looked like. Anyway, he walked about 10 feet away from me. Craziest thing. Not a baseball player, but it happened at a baseball game. So another chance encounter. All right, so there's 4 stories of, again, not star baseball players, but baseball players that I had coincidentally run into, and a bonus story for you. My question to you is, tell me about your accidental, coincidental happenings upon baseball players in your lifetime. Drop those down in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Again, these aren't stories where you went to a meet and greet. I have stories like that where I, went to an event to meet baseball players, for example. We're Dyersville, where the Field of Dreams is kind of close by here. And so prior to the Field of Dreams game being played, years before that, they would have Team of Dreams, it was called, where they would have retired Major League Baseball players come and play on the Field of Dreams. And you could get photo ops and you could, purchase pictures and autographs and all of that stuff. And I did that a couple of years. Took my sons up there. My dad went a couple of times, and we saw players like Jose Canseco, Ricky Henderson, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Ozzie Smith, Mike Schmidt, I believe. I'd forget some if I tried to list them all. Anyway, they'd have players of that caliber there, and you could. Reggie Jackson was there one year, so we got a photo with Reggie Jackson. And you could go there and just get really close to the players. You're in line. We were in line to get a Reggie photo. You had to sign up and get in line basically. And as we're going through the line, there's a tent there, and there's just players just sitting there, 2 feet away from you, just hanging out. Ozzie Smith's just sitting there hanging out. Johnny Bench sitting there talking to Pete Rose, just hanging out. Mike Schmidt's there hanging out, just talking to these guys. I think Jim Palmer was there. Anyway, just a bunch of guys just sitting there hanging out, and they're like right next to you. And you weren't supposed to talk to the players unless you get the photo op. You purchase the photo op, but you're literally in line 2 feet away from these guys. They're at a table right here in the tent, and you're just in line, and there they are. So, of course, people would talk to them. Of course, we would talk to them. So, anyway, So, my stories that I talked about today are more about the players that I accidentally ran into. And that's what I want to hear from you guys. What are the players that you accidentally had an encounter with, or maybe their families or whatever? Just some weird, random things. Drop those in the comments. I want to hear your stories. Tell me your stories. I'd love to read them, just because I think it's a cool thing that can happen. And that's where we will leave things. I just thought I'd make a video, talk about a couple of these random childhood memories, and hear from you guys. So I have a couple of tabletop baseball projects you can check out over at baseballmaelstrom.com. You can see some videos on this channel about those projects if you're interested. But if you're not, if you're just here for this, hopefully you enjoyed those stories. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a great evening.